What can I say? I'm on a bit of a Mel Gibson kick right now. In this movie, yikes. Apocalypto. Now, Apocalypto came out in 2006 and is directed and written by Mel Gibson. It was produced by Mel Gibson. And I believe this is the first movie that he directed after The Passion of the Christ. And with all the controversy that surrounded that movie, you'd think he would take this opportunity to make a simple, crowd pleaser, popcorn, fun movie to get people to forget about all the horrific things that they saw in The Passion of the Christ. But no, that's not really Mel Gibson's way. He went hard into this movie. And this movie is about the Mayan civilization right at the end when Columbus is about to discover that they exist. And this movie is 100% an indigenous movie. There's really no white people to speak of here. At least until the very end of this movie, which I guess I'll spoil here because when Mel Gibson was coming up with this movie, he kind of had it planned in reverse. He knew how the third act was going to go, he knew how it was going to end, but then he had to work backwards and come up with the rest of the story. So I'm kind of going to review this movie backwards. Because the real plot twist moment here is when we have our main character, the guy we've been following throughout this whole movie, Jaguar Paw. He's the son of the chief, and he's running for his life through this jungle, and he comes to the edge of the beach, and he sees the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, the three ships that Columbus brought. And that's when you're like, oh, yeah, so their days are numbered. Because we know history, and we know that the Mayans do not last very long after Columbus discovered America for various reasons. And as far as plot twists go, that's a really effective one, and one that doesn't feel like it's coming out of left field. It actually feels earned, given the themes of life, death, new birth, and the evolution of civilization. So when you see the white man arrive at the very end, it does signal that, oh, yeah, this is the end. It's the end of the movie, and it's the end of their whole way of life. And the movie doesn't really dwell on this for very long. The movie ends pretty abruptly. You don't even see our characters interact with the Spanish at all. They kind of just go back into the jungle to start a new life for themselves. So that's all good, but this movie wouldn't be nearly as effective if we didn't identify with this guy and his tribe and his plight. And this movie is kind of plot-wise very similar to Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which is a parallel that just kind of hit me by surprise when I was watching this movie, at least for the first 2/3. You have this pretty small, family-oriented tribe that's just chilling out in the jungle, doing their own thing, and then kind of out of nowhere, they just get stomped by this other tribe, just came in, wiped them out, took what they wanted, and enslaved pretty much everyone that survived, and brought them back to their city with buildings and pyramids and just this whole other degree of civilization, which is really cool to see visualized because it shows that not all of the different tribes of Mayan culture were at the same level, either developmentally or socioeconomically. Because you would have different tribes that have access to different resources, and when a more developed tribe makes war with a less developed tribe and takes their land, takes their people, they're not going to be all that kind about it. This was a very intense and brutal culture back in the day, and I appreciate Mel Gibson for showing this. Now, I am not an expert in Mayan history. I don't know how historically accurate this movie is, but the stuff I do remember from school and just from some of my own research, this movie does seem pretty accurate in a very raw, unfiltered kind of way. Because at about the midpoint here, we get this movie's equivalent to the scourging scene from Passion of the Christ. That one scene that just takes your breath away with how horrific and brutal it is. And it's the human sacrifice scene, which is something that really happened, and I think the way it's depicted here is at least plausible for how it could have happened back in the day. We'd have this shaman, this high priest, this very charismatic guy standing on top of the pyramid, and everybody below is cheering and chanting. Then they bring out these men, lay them on top of the slab, rip out their heart, hold it up in the air. And something that I really appreciate about this movie that's pretty nuanced about the human sacrifice scene is that what the high priest was presenting it as to the people down below is not the reality of what was actually going on, because the way it's presented is that we have these volunteers, these strong men that are willingly laying themselves down to appease the gods. And that's just not the case. What they did is they took their slaves, their captives, they painted them up to look like warriors and forced them down to get their heart ripped out. And it does effectively paint a picture of how something as brutal and horrific as human sacrifice could be accepted by the masses if it's presented in that way, ultimately based on a lie. But if the people are either ignorant or willfully ignorant of that fact, then yeah, I could see how a civilization could get to that point. And Jaguar Paw actually manages to survive that experience because there was a solar eclipse, and they took that as, oh, the gods are at peace, so we can stop butchering these guys now. So they get set loose, set free. They're like, okay, your jungle's on the other side of that cornfield. If you can run all the way over there across this plain, then you're home free. And so they run, but this tribe has a real sick sense of humor. So they start shooting arrows and spears at them, really just for the sport of it. But Jaguar Paw, as the lucky guy that he is, actually survives, and he makes his way into the cornfield, and then everyone's like, oh, we can't let that happen. So they all pursue. And then we have the foot chase, and the foot chase goes on for a really long time. And this is around the point in the movie when I start to feel like it's getting a little overindulgent. And that's not to say the other scenes weren't a little indulgent. They definitely took their time. But in the beginning, I can understand that you're just starting to get to know this tribe. You really want to see how they work in the jungle with very limited resources. Then you have this other tribe come in that's more of what you remember from the Mayans learning in school, with the pyramid, with the system of government and religion and hierarchy and slave auctions, which I'm sure also definitely happened back then. I feel like they could have really cut down this foot chase. It goes on for a good 30 to 40 minutes, somewhere in there. It's incredibly long. And while there are some interesting things that happen in this foot chase, it's not just running the entire time, although that is most of it. He does have to outrun an actual jaguar, which he does a real cool flanking maneuver so that the jaguar pounces on the guys that are chasing him and not him. It's actually pretty creative how he does that. And then he's got other traps set up, like a beehive, like this thing that spins around and stabs him through the chest. So in that way, there is some variety in this chase. It's not just running. Man, I feel like they could have cut easily 10 minutes out of this movie just from the third act alone. And I feel like if Mel Gibson took another pass at this movie in the editing, he could have easily shaved down at least 30 minutes throughout the entire movie. Just to make it a little tighter, give the movie a bit more of a sense of urgency, because when things do happen, it's very intense and very raw. And that's the one thing I can really say about this movie, is it feels authentically Mayan. It feels like we're getting a peek behind the curtain of what this civilization looked like centuries ago, which is really cool. And the fact that it's not in English actually works to this movie's advantage. For one, the authenticity of it, it just feels more real when they're speaking the language that they would have spoken back then. Also, because you're limited to what you can read on the screen, you're paying more attention to the physicality of the performance than the verbal delivery of the lines. It becomes a much more visual experience where I'm sure if you turned off the subtitles, you'd be able to follow what's going on in this movie okay enough. I don't think you would get too lost. I gotta say, this was a nice surprise. I didn't really know what to expect going into this movie. I know Mel Gibson's directed a whole bunch of different types of movies, and thinking about him directing ancient Mayan culture, I didn't really know what to expect, and this didn't disappoint. It was really raw and brutal and tough to watch in some scenes, but I feel like that was all for the purpose of both educating the audience of the realities of Mayan culture, where it was a brutal culture. They had no qualms about ending people's life and human sacrifice and all the other things that you see happen in this movie. Whereas us coming from the 20th century, we're like, oh, how could they have ever done something like that? But this movie does a great job of putting you in that environment, giving you the perspective of the Mayan people of the day, where you get it, you understand what they did. It might not be moral or okay by today's standards, but that was the reality. And I gotta applaud Mel Gibson for that. It takes a lot of guts to go that deep into the culture and really explore what was going on there. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Apocalypto? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.